Hey, ninth graders, good to see you again. I hope everybody is doing fantastic. I am trying to get this video in this afternoon before I go out and do some yard work and get all icky. It's hard having to put on makeup and get presentable for these videos when I don't want to. But it gives me a good excuse to, I'm sure my family appreciates it. So I hope you guys are doing good. Thursday effectively serves sort of as our last day of the week. And so it always feels like Friday on Thursday with this new routine that we are in. I'm sure you've probably heard that we are staying home and working from home until the end of the school year. And I believe that May 15th is going to be the last day of school, and so we're still waiting on some of the details about what that looks like. But I hope your family is staying safe and that you're not driving each other crazy and that you're showing each other grace. And I hope that you feel like I'm extending you some grace as well. I am really drowning in piles of papers that I'm still trying to grade and get these videos recorded for my other classes as well. So I'm planning on spending a significant chunk of time this weekend and probably tomorrow trying to get caught up. So again, I apologize for the lateness at which you're getting responses to your work and that sort of thing. So anyway, today we're going to jump back into our conversation about Africa. I've brought my friend Petronella again to visit with us, and also of course I'm going to bring in Captain America to our screen. I watched The Avengers the other night. Whew, loved that show. Really enjoying watching those when we have a little bit of family time. Today we're going to jump back into our conversation about Africa. I'm going to put my glasses on so I can actually see what I'm doing. And I've sent you the PowerPoint, and I want you to watch my video lecture while you are watching or previewing the PowerPoint presentation. So watch me talk while you're previewing this. So I've started out the PowerPoint with a reminder of where we have been. We talked about Central Africa the last time, and in particular that it is dominated by kind of a heavy, wet, tropical rainforest type of setting. And we're going to kind of segue into Western Africa. So the map that the United Nations uses for the regions of Africa, Central Africa and Western Africa are close together. They're on the Atlantic coast. Both of them are dominated by pretty significant river systems. Central Africa is dominated by the Congo River system, and Western Africa is dominated by the Niger or the Niger River. There's a few countries in that part of Africa that get its name from that, Nigeria in particular. Both of those regions combine, however, Western and Central Africa, because of the tropical rainforest and the jungles and the river systems and mountains as well, and the ocean, of course, create a climate where the disease of malaria is extremely prevalent. And so our fact of the day is actually going to be malaria. So in your Google Docs, I have created a little fact of the day sheet. So as I'm talking, or you can write them down and then go in and fill that in. But I want you to list 6 facts of the day about malaria in the continent of Africa. So there are several pictures, but one of the things that you will notice when you go through this, the map area, there's a picture of a map, and the area that is in black represents tropical rainforest. And so the areas north of that and south of that really struggle to get the condition or the disease of malaria under control. It's primarily malaria or mosquito bound. And so there's a really grody picture of a mosquito biting somebody, and this particular mosquito that you see here in this picture is one that's common in Africa. And the next picture shows what it looks like when the mosquito is extracting the blood and how the mosquito fills up with that blood. Unfortunately, there's also a transfer of a bacteria. I think it's a virus, a virus that I think it's a virus that enters the body and creates all kinds of havoc, especially in young children. So I am going to go into my fact of the day notes, and I'm going to read those, and as I'm reading those, you'll be jotting down 6 of whatever facts that you want to. I have a lot of information on it, so I'm going to read through it, and then you can pick whatever you want to. It's pretty interesting information. So malaria causes more than 300 million acute or severe illnesses and kills at least 1 million people every single year. 90% of those deaths due to malaria occur in the continent of Africa. Most of those deaths occur south of the Sahara, on that western and central part of Africa. And most of those deaths, that 90% of the total world population, total world count of deaths, happens to children that are 5 and under. So you can imagine it's a scary situation in the continent of Africa when your young child contracts malaria. Oftentimes it is deadly. Many children in Africa who do not die from it initially become very susceptible to it and have it multiple times, which can lead to all kinds of health problems, which then can lead to death. And so let's see here. So the majority of infections caused by malaria in Africa are caused by a parasite that is injected into the human body, and the most common bug that transmits that parasite is a mosquito, and the particular mosquito that passes on this parasite is very prevalent in these parts of Africa, Western Africa. Most people at risk of the disease live in areas that have a relatively stable malaria transmission, which means that people that live in this area, infections are very common, and they occur with such frequency that the population actually, over the course of time, as they get older, develop an immunity to it. It's kind of that herd immunity that we've been talking about with the coronavirus. And so let's see, it says a smaller portion of people live in other areas of Africa that are more seasonal, and so they're not constantly exposed to it. And of course the danger of that is that you don't have an immunity to it and you become very susceptible to severe illnesses. Let me jump down. There are 3 principal ways in which malaria can contribute to death in young children, 5 and under. First, they have an overwhelming acute infection, which essentially their temperature skyrockets. It causes seizures, brain hemorrhaging, and eventually they fall into a coma and they die. And that's because the temperatures rise so significantly trying to fight this parasite. And in this situation, a child can die fairly quickly. I've heard cases in Africa where the child starts running a fever, they immediately assume that it's malaria, and they are gone within 24 to 48 hours because they cannot get to a hospital or to a doctor where they could receive medications. The second most common way that it contributes to death in young children is repeated infections, like I said before, where they develop a severe anemia. And I'm assuming it's a result of the white blood cells constantly fighting an infection, which causes them to be anemic, which makes them susceptible to other things and can cause death. And then third, children whose mothers contract malaria while they're pregnant with them, they tend to have a significantly low birth weight, and so they start out in the world already at risk, and this oftentimes will lead to death within the first month of life because the mother was so severely sick during the child's development. Let's see here. Let me zip on down. There are 5 facts that you'll see slides that show 4 of the 5, but there's 5 facts that, according to one website, everybody needs to know about malaria in Africa. Number 1, 35 countries, most of them in Africa, are responsible for 96% of the world's malaria cases. Let me say that again. There are 35 countries in the world that are responsible for 96% of the world's malaria cases. Number 2, 40% of all malaria cases in the world take place in 2 countries. Of course, they are in Africa. 1 is Nigeria, which is in Western Africa, and 2 is the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is in Central Africa. I'm going to guess it's largely in part because of the river systems. Number 3, malaria costs the continent of Africa $12 billion a year in lost GDP because of so much of their energy is fighting malaria. Number 4, a malaria-stricken family can spend up to a quarter of their annual income combating the disease of malaria. And number 5, insecticide-treated nets can reduce malaria transmission by 50%, but only 2% of African children actually have access to these tents or to these nets. And there's actually a video associated with that particular fact that I'm going to have you watch. Let's see here. Just some general information. They have recently, doctors and scientists across the world have finished a study on a malaria vaccine that was introduced to several African countries, I think in 2019. If it's the study that I'm aware of, Bill Gates of Microsoft has been intimately involved in funding and promoting this program. And so starting about a year ago, children in a number of African countries, it's a case study, began receiving these vaccinations. I think it's 360,000, and they're given vaccines, or this vaccine for malaria is given to them along with a series of other vaccines that they normally would get. And so the 5-year previous tests proved to be safe and successful, and so they are introducing it into part of the population as well. If it is effective, that's going to be just a game changer for the people of Africa. There are lots of malaria drugs on the market. Probably the most familiar one we've been hearing about recently is called, let me make sure I say it right, hydroxychloroquine. It's been on the market for decades, and somebody who contracts malaria can take the drug, and it's an antiviral drug. And so I need to go back and look into that, whether malaria, if the parasite creates a virus, or how that's connected, because I'm not a scientist and I don't really understand that. I'm reading the information, but I'm not fully aware of it. I know that antibiotics can fight bacterial infections, but they cannot fight viral infections. So I don't know if the parasite introduced into the system is the virus or causes a virus. I'm not really sure how that works, but I do know that hydroxychloroquine is an antiviral drug. It's kind of like if you get the flu, they give you Tamiflu. And the flu is a virus, and Tamiflu is an antiviral drug. And usually what it does, it doesn't take the malaria or the flu away, but it shortens the length of the symptoms. And so if people are dying because of an extended high fever, the days that they fight that high fever are reduced, that sort of thing. So right now, the world supply of hydroxychloroquine is being hoarded by the countries of the world because there seems to be a belief that it will help in the fight against coronavirus or COVID-19. There are several studies that are happening all over the world that seem to indicate that it is successful in helping people turn the corner and back to the road to recovery. It doesn't take the disease away, but it does shorten the length and the severity of the symptoms related to the virus. So, and there are some other drugs as well that can be given. Of course, the problem in Africa is people can't get to the drugs. They're so far removed in large cities or towns or doctors that are 2 or 3 day distance away. And then seems like there was something else I was going to mention, but we'll just say since 2000, the number of deaths to malaria in the world have fallen by 2/3, and that's in large part due to medications that have been made available, but a huge part of that are these insecticide covered nets or soaked nets that people in African countries will use to sleep under at night. Mosquitoes come out as the sun is setting and as the sun is coming up in the morning, kind of the dusk and dawn period of time. And so if they are safely underneath those insecticide nets, they will not get stung by a mosquito, and consequently they won't contract the virus. So it's very critical that those nets be made available in those communities. And the United States government and all kinds of other organizations have helped to make sure that that happens. Okay, I think I've given you enough on that. Enjoy those pictures, those awful pictures of malaria and the gross one on the bug. There will be a slide that has a film strip, and it says, please view the World Vision Malaria Mosquito Net video. So it's one that World Vision did to encourage their mosquito net program. And then the next slide just is kind of a little review on what we talked about in Central Africa, which I've already discussed. And so we're going to move on to Western Africa. The countries of Western Africa are on the, I'll say the bubble of the continent. So if here's your continent, like here, it's this bubble right here. Probably the most significant country, the one that we hear about the most, is Nigeria, Niger, Mali, Mauritania, Cote d'Ivoire, Liberia, Ghana, Cameroon. And so Nigeria is the largest and the most economically, well, they have a lot of oil, so they have a larger economy. Okay, so before we dive into some of the politics and history of Western Africa, I do want you guys to be familiar with a little bit of the landscape and the terrain of this area. There are a couple of maps. The first definition that you'll see is the Sahel, S-A-H-E-L. And as you know, the northern part of the continent of Africa is dominated by the Sahara Desert. It's just a big, ugly desert. It's not ugly, but it's big and huge. It's the size of the United States. And in between the Sahara Desert and that tropical rainforest and river area that's lush and beautiful and full of mosquitoes, is this strip of land that is kind of the border between the Sahara Desert, the really horrible dry conditions, and those tropical conditions, and it's called the Sahel. The next definition on here is the word desertification. Make sure I'm saying that right. Desertification. Uh-oh, my PowerPoint, my mouse is not wanting to work. All right, there we go. Desertification, and so I'm just going to read it. The spread of desert-like conditions in Western Africa, the Sahel, is becoming more and more a permanent fixture like a desert. And I'm assuming that that means that they've had less and less rain, and so those areas in between the barrenness of the Sahara Desert and the lush tropical forest is becoming smaller and smaller and drier and drier. I don't know what that means for the tropical rainforest area, but much and much larger portions of the continent of Africa, according to this map, are becoming drier and drier. And just take a look at the map when you see that, when it comes up on the screen. Okay, a few things about Western Africa, and these are the notes. The Western Africa is dominated by the Niger River system, the Sahel, and then of course the northern boundaries of the Sahara Desert. Historically, Western Africa was kind of a center of education and influence as it was related to the religion of Islam, and then also the gold trade. And so there were all kinds of trade routes that took place from the eastern part of the continent over Saudi Arabian Peninsula all the way to Timbuktu, which is a city in the western part of the continent and in the Sahara Desert in the country of Mali. And so it was called the Songhai Empire. And it was notorious during its era for its center of education and religious training and that sort of thing. People would travel thousands of miles to visit Timbuktu. Today, if you hear somebody, I don't know if this expression is used anymore, but when I was growing up, if we were driving somewhere, for instance, that was off the beaten path or way out of the way or took a really, really long time, didn't seem like there was anything between here and there, we would say, oh, we're driving to Timbuktu, which meant we're driving out into the middle of nowhere. The city of Timbuktu actually still exists today, and it's more of a touristy town. There's not a lot of thriving industry or anything there. It is in the desert, but 1,000 years, or let's see, I'm gonna say, yeah, probably 1,500 years ago, it was the center of at least parts of the universe. European traders would go down there and they would pay the Islamic lords a significant amount of money to get access to the gold trade routes that led straight to Timbuktu. There was also a fairly lucrative slave trade of African slaves that moved across the Arabian Peninsula and into northern Africa, along with the spread of Islam. So slavery is not something new to the continent of Africa, but removing slaves from one continent to the Western Hemisphere obviously was something entirely new and different. So we'll talk about that as well. So between the 1500s and 1800s, this is like the Christopher Columbus era. You know the poem, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So after Columbus discovered this new world, it became, my husband just texted me. It became financially prosperous to engage in the African slave trade and take African people who were involved in wars and other things in the continent of Africa, sold by Africans to European trading companies who were looking for a profit in sugar, eventually tobacco, tea, and other things. And they were taken from the continent of Africa and they were brought over to the Western Hemisphere, to the Caribbean, to the Bahamas, ultimately to North America, to South America, to Central America, and they were used as slave labor. Initially, those that were brought here could purchase their freedom after a certain period of time, but that changed sadly at the end of the 1600s. And if you were a black slave, it became a permanent situation. And that was primarily true just of black slaves rather than European indentured servants or even Native Americans. And I mean, I'm not going to go into much detail about it, but it's just a really, really sad situation. It deprived the continent of Africa of generations of young men and leaders. It pitted African nations against one another because they were trading those slaves for guns and rum, and which created, again, a terrible, unstable situation that is still exists to this day. It's transformed the makeup and the physical appearance of the Western Hemisphere. People who are from Central America, South America, North America, that have mixed relations. They have, for instance, a person who is Mexican is actually somebody who is European Spanish as well as Native American. You have people from Haiti and I don't know if I remember I said Dominican Republic, who are products of Native Americans and African roots. And of course here in the United States, we have generations of people who have European and black ethnicity in their running through their DNA. And so at this point in history, our combined history of our peoples in the Western Hemisphere, the European hemisphere, and the African hemisphere have kind of merged. That was not the case, of course, in the 15 and 1600s. And so being a slave meant that you, or being black meant that you were a slave if you existed and lived in the Northern and the Western Hemisphere. Over time, there did develop a free black community, but unfortunately, oftentimes that was not the case. And so really horrible. And when I have you guys in U.S. history, I will elaborate more on that. There is a video that I'm going to have you watch associated with this as well. The next bullet point on this is Nigeria. It talks about Nigeria has the largest economy in all of Africa, not just Western Africa, and that is primarily because they have oil reserves. Nigeria is extremely unstable. They have religious problems. In fact, 16,000 Christians have been killed by primarily Islamic radicals in the country since 2015. There's an imaginary border between the Muslim northern part of Nigeria and the Christian southern part of Nigeria, and the government does not have control. And so, unfortunately, Christians far too often in Nigeria have found themselves in the crosshairs of the instability. Let me see here. All right, so the next PowerPoint is a picture of some of the slave trade routes. You will see that the western part of Africa, the coast, the Senegal coast, Sierra Leone, this actually says Slave Coast. It's in that hook of Africa. That is where most of the African slaves were taken from and brought to the New World. There were many, many, many more millions of Africans actually taken to South America than North America. One of the primary reasons that they were brought to the New World is because of they had developed an immunity to malaria. In the Caribbean, the hot, sticky islands in the areas of Florida and the South Carolinas where rice grew, the African slaves could withstand the terrible hot, humid conditions and the malaria-like conditions when the Native Americans were transplanted from there could not, or when indentured servants would die from those diseases, the Africans did not. And so that's in large part why they were used significantly. There's some pictures of some of the slave fortresses, the one in Ghana. It still exists as a museum. They left it standing. You can take a virtual tour of it if you want to. I didn't put one on here. But it was a huge moneymaker for the Portuguese, the Spanish, the French, the Dutch, the British. In fact, until slavery was eradicated in Great Britain, it probably was their number one or number two a money-making operation, pretty significant. And in particular with the British, it was in developing sugar and sugar plantations. You'll see a film strip there that says, watch the short video on the Atlantic slave trade. So when you see that, I want you to watch that. Next slide shows a map of, again, top Christian persecution in the world, and Nigeria is number 10. And like I just said, 16,000 Christians have been killed in Nigeria since 2015. Most historical estimates are that more Christians have lost their lives because of their faith in the 20th and 21st century than in all of Christian history combined. So it's been a pretty bloody century, 1,000 or 100 years for Christians in parts of the world and large parts of Africa. One of the agents of evil in Nigeria is a group called Boko Haram, and there are a couple of images of them here. They're a militant Islamic fundamentalist group based out of Nigeria, and depending on the era, they have claimed to be part of Al-Qaeda during the 9/11 era. Most recently, they have claimed and sworn allegiance to ISIS. They have their own PR arm, and they make videos and films, and they do lots and lots and lots of kidnapping. They do that in an effort to get money. They kidnap people and then accept ransoms for them or exchange for hostages for some of their men that have been captured. And the Nigerian government doesn't really know what to do with them. They're very, very well supplied by Islamic groups. The leader is named Abu Bakr Shakawa, maybe, and there's a picture of him. It's a picture that was taken from a video that he had released. And then the next PowerPoint is a picture of a family that lost their loved ones, and there's a film strip that says, "Now watch the video of Voice of the Martyrs, Nigeria." Some of you have seen this video before, and it is a testimony of a young girl, two young girls, I think it is, about what happened when they were worshiping in their church one Sunday morning when Boko Haram or militants came into the village and decided they were going to kill everybody in the church. And they tell what happened and their eternal perspective, that they're separated from their loved ones now, but they know not for eternity. And it's really a really heart-wrenching video, but one that I want you to watch if you haven't seen it before. If you've seen it before, it's still worth watching again. And then almost done here. One of the last slides is a picture of a group of 270 or so teenage girls that have been, I think they were Christians, but I'm not sure. They are wearing robes and their heads are covered. And in 2014, Boko Haram kidnapped them from a school in a small community. They were in a boarding school. Typically what they would do was they would either ask for a ransom. In this case, they think that they probably sold them off in marriage to Muslim men throughout the country in the jungles and out of the reach of the government. Some of the girls have been returned. I think about 80 have been returned, but most of them, or more than half of them, nobody knows. Their parents don't know what have happened to them. And so there is a very short video clip that I want you to watch associated with that as well. It's called the Chibok Girls. Chibok is the name of the town that they were kidnapped from. And then after you finish listening to me and doing your fact of the day and reviewing the PowerPoint, the next to last PowerPoint asks you to, in conclusion, I want you to read 3 pages in your geography book, chapter 21, section 2, History and Culture of West Africa. So some of the things we've talked about today, but I do want you to read that independently during the lesson. And so as soon as you're done here, you can, and you watch the videos, I want you to read that. That's indicated on your little Google Doc assignment sheet that you're going to turn in to me. And then the very last PowerPoint is a picture of the Giza pyramids in Egypt. So next week we're going to go to North Africa and talk about a couple of countries in North Africa, one of those being Egypt. And I want you guys to create the fact of the day and the PowerPoint like you did with the Serengeti migration. This time I'm going to try to set up the Google Doc for you in Google Slides so that you can just do it right there and not have to worry about how to set it up. If that doesn't work, you can do your own PowerPoint, but I think it'll work. And that is due on Tuesday, by class time on Tuesday. I'm also going to include in my assignment message or whatever is the Africa practice map. I haven't forgotten about that. We're still going to take that. And so I'm going to send you a copy so that you can start looking at that. And I intend to have you guys do the Africa map test, just the Africa map, probably a week from Thursday. Probably a week from Tuesday. A week from Tuesday. So you have a good week and a half to kind of play with it. I'm going to see if I can find an online video game, map game that you can use to try to commit those to memory. So anyway, I think that's it. Can't think of anything else off the top of my head, so I'm going to go ahead and call it quits. I want to get this under 35 minutes, and I'm getting close. So I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. If you need to talk to me in person, just email me and I'll send you my phone number. Mr. Mosley said I could do that, given the crazy circumstances. If there's any reason that you need to talk to me and communications between email or Google Classroom are not working for you. So, I think that's it. Captain America says adios. Oh, Mr. Harden is over here as well. He says adios. Petronella says adios. Love you guys, and have a fantastic, safe, happy, wonderful weekend, and I'll see you on Tuesday. Bye.